Thursday. But anyway, in any event, this is the Friday Flash Forward now on Thursday. I'm Reece, joined by my usual co-host Callum, and tonight we have a special guest, Bencel, former coach of Sin Gaming. How are we going, guys?
Yeah, not bad. Had a pretty rough day, but
Oof. Hopefully we'll get better when we talk with some League of Legends. We'll talk about some League of Legends. I can use my words.
Excited to talk about some OPL and watch some OPL tomorrow too.
Should be great. Some Friday night OPL. Get us ready and going for the weekend. So we'll get right into things. What we're going to do this evening is, because we've got the first of the two Super Weeks starting up, we're going to go with a bit of, just to get everyone really in the mood for Super Week, we're going to do a little bit of a segment I like to call the Cotton Eye Joe segment. We're going to go look at each team and see where did they come from and where are they going. Where did they come from, Cotton Eye Joe? I'm sure you all got that. So we'll get first team. We'll start from the bottom of the ladder. We've got the unfortunate Bombers, who have one map win and no match wins. Obviously, you can't win a match with only one win. So we'll start with Callum. Where have they come from to get to this point? What's brought them to the foot of the ladder?
So before the season started, they obviously replaced Raid and Pabu and brought in Sleeping and Tiger, the European imports, and for the most part we all expected that it'd at least be off the bottom of the ladder, be around 5th, maybe 6th.
Yeah, I know.
But what's happened is they've just not really shown anything. They've shown a little bit of hope in Tiger, but besides that, they've just fallen off a cliff. The communication doesn't seem right. They're going in where they shouldn't. Players are all over the place. They're going. One person's going in, one person's going out. It just seems to be a mess.
How do you see the Bombers, Bencel?
Yeah, I mean, so part of what we have to look at here is that they have had, I would say, a pretty rough draw. They did have like the first match that it looked like they would have a chance of winning against Sin last week. They must have come hopeful into that one, and then everyone's hopes for them were quickly trampled on. It's just, I think on an individual level, they're doing okay, but there is almost zero team play to be proud of from that team. There is no lane that seems to be working well with Seb, like on any consistent basis. Sometimes you have a team that's slacking, but maybe their jungler finds success when he's ganking one lane, and it looks like they have chosen not to give any particular resources to Luch, even though he's the one who seems to be doing the best in the last couple of weeks. I would say that their communication could only have been hampered by the fact that they weren't playing with Luch in the first couple of weeks. But it's really hard to see where their progression is going in terms of their team play and what they're talking about on stage.
Right, so we've got a couple of things here. When both of you bring up the points that you have, the first thing that comes to my mind is leadership. So is that a case of who are we looking to be at fault here? Is that something that the veteran players like Seb and Rosie, or is that something that Windows Monkey has to take responsibility for? Is it shared between them, or is it just really all six of them need to sort of take their own slice of the blame for this?
Well, I'll take this one first. I guess I would never put any pressure on imports. I think that would be my first point, is I would not be putting pressure on imports to take on any kind of leadership role. When you're putting a team together, one of the things you should be considering is, who am I going to have in the leadership position? I don't know much about Windows Monkey coaching. I haven't really seen any evidence of what it does yet. Maybe it's slower absorption rate, and it will come into play later. But for now, there's nothing really to speak of. I think that their drafts have been okay. I haven't really been a big fan of the champions that Sleeping is playing. But when I look at leadership roles on the team, from what I know, Luch is probably the most vocal person out of him, Rosie, and Seb, the remaining members. And yeah, they're just, you have to put the responsibility, so I would put it mostly on him, and then to a lesser degree on the other two players, but yeah, it just seems non-existent for now.
Cal?
Yeah, just to back that up, so realistically, we've heard of talk of Seb as being leader, and we've also heard as Rosie being leaders in the past, and the thing we have to consider here is that a natural leadership role is, so they've obviously had the leadership roles in the past, but it doesn't mean they're a natural leader, and if you're not a natural leader, then taking on the reins with like a new setup can take a while. But on that note as well is you also have to consider what Windows Monkey is doing about it, because it depends on what kind of structure they're running. Are they running like a 5-man communication? Are they running with one point guy? And that all depends on like how they're going to communicate, because if you're using a 1 point guy, okay, everyone's obviously going to be spitting information, and one guy's going to be making the eventual call. If you're running with 5 cooks in the kitchen, might just be a little bit too much, and for them to start to improve, they really need to work out what their structure's going to be like.
Fair enough. Okay. So with that, is there anything else that that stands out as being contributing to the Bombers' issues?
Yeah, I think like I touched on it in one of my articles. I think the main thing that will make our point for us regarding their communication, it's very easy to say this team looks like they have no communication when obviously we don't have any kind of ability to look into the sound that's going on during the game.
Yeah.
But when you look at the way they play around objectives, they all just appear on totally different pages. Sleeping, he's been playing like mostly carry champs, but his TP play is definitely lacking. He's tried picking some counter matchups, that's been going terribly, and you could put that up to stage nerves potentially, or being too bold trying to do it against chippies, for example. But sticking on the way they play around objectives, if you just watch how many of them go in while the others are retreating, it just looks like a mess. And that is really, I think, the number one symptom of lack of communication and the team not being on the same page around how to play around their objectives.
So maybe they'll take to heart something like what Juves has been talking about in relation to their match in particular, when he just went backstage after the game 1 loss and said, "All right, we're just going to fight. If I see a fight, I'm calling the fight and we fight." And then at least you get the let's fight plan down, and then you can expand from there. Is it so maybe that's something that's I had been thinking of as a solution to that.
So that's that's like a perfect example of where a team that has a leader, he identifies something that is a quick short fix and gives them a chance of winning their next 2 games against a team they just lost against. So let's say that the Bombers were stronger opponents after game 1. But that is what a good leader can do, is it can turn around a seemingly lost position with a very simple kind of strategy that you can apply very easily. And we just don't see anything like that from the Bombers side.
Okay, so before we move on to the last part of the Bombers, do you have anything to add there, Callum, to that last point?
I think the only other thing that I'd add is while we're saying it's like purely like communication, it might not just be purely on the communication side. You've also got things like a lack of trust that can also impact it. And if there's a lack of trust, then that significantly impacts like every single communication call you're making, and that's just something you got to build up over time. And obviously they've brought in Sleeping Tiger, the import players. In OS, we're known as a tight-knit community, and we've brought in new players, so maybe that trust isn't there either.
That's reasonable. Okay. So with that said, where do the Bombers go from here? Is there any way that they would escape the relegation spots? And I say spots because, of course, there won't actually be a promotion relegation tournament for Split 1, but is this sort of we'll just see what we can do and chuck it in the bin for Split 2, or is there a way up into 5th for them?
So
I don't see a way into 5th for them after losing to Sin. I mean, how much easier does their run home get? Like, don't they play Direwolves in order this week? Don't they?
This week, yeah. I remember seeing that on Twitter. Someone said I think they might be in for something that looks a lot like another O2.
So they've got, in theory, they have games against Tectonic and Sin. that they have a chance of winning, but in their current state, even if a slight upward trajectory were to start happening, I couldn't really see them winning more than 2 matches, and I just don't see that bringing them out of 7th or 8th.
Yeah, their last 6 matches are Direwolves, Order, Sin, Tectonic, Chiefs, and Legacy. So that is a little bit of a murderer's row. In fact, that is the murderer's row. The only thing they're missing out of that is Avant.
Maybe they can
Every
count their
team,
lucky
right?
stars.
That's just every team, right?
Well,
They're
it, looks,
playing
yeah,
Avant.
it would seem that everyone's missing one. Is playing everyone except one team.
Yeah.
If that's what they're doing, that's a good point. Everyone else has got Avant on the run home. Okay, so Callum, sorry, I think I cut you off.
Yeah. So for me, there's not going to be a quick fix to this, at least this split, because obviously they've got the tough run home. So communication is something that you can fix over time, and come split 2, fingers crossed they do fix it. But at least for like quick fix stuff, maybe you'll see them at least get to maybe 6th, because obviously we've got the tight run between Tectonic, Sin, and Bombers, but basically I'll look at play easy to execute compositions, try to give every player a very distinct role, and basically through that you're basically saying, through your champion select, you're basically giving everybody a defined role that everyone should be able to perform, and if they don't perform then you've got bigger issues.
Sure, and the other thing as well is that the positioning of some of these matches, like the week 8 Chiefs, week 9 Legacy, particularly in that order, those can be the kind of things where if you are building something over time, then maybe they can take a game off Chiefs and then the whole set off Legacy and finish on a high moving into Split 2. So that is, for my money, that's probably what I would see their run home looking like. Is that's where they go from here, is build for Split 2 and look to send a message in the last 2 weeks and try and knock off a map or maybe even an entire match against one of those biggest scalps. So with that said, we will jump into the next team, who is tied from them and technically below them. I probably should have started with them on the OPL website, but it is what it is. Is Tectonic. So we'll go with Bencel first this time. Where have Tectonic come from to get here?
Well, they made some interesting roster choices to get to where they are now. So we've ended up with a roster of Paprise, Swathe, Shock, Low Tilting. Shock, he has been on, I would say he's been on the incline since he came into the OPL. It's been looking good for him. He's been slowly expanding his champion pool, which is always really good to see. And he's jumped into a role which is pretty hotly contested in the OPL. You have some of the best players, and even on a team which isn't in the top 4, like Legacy, they still have Claire as their mid laner, so he's got stiff competition there. I expected, I predicted at the start of the season that Low would take on a leadership role, from what I knew about the team, because I hadn't known Shock or Tilting to have those qualities. But potentially Swathe could have shouldered some of that too, knowing him. I think Low has been a little bit underwhelming, I would say, overall.
Great.
Tilting has been pretty solid, but Low is probably someone that, when you were putting this roster together, you were banking on him to continue his improvement since he first entered the OPL as well. Swathe and Paprise, it's hard to judge them too harshly. Obviously, they've only been here this split. I think Swathe has done reasonably well, and I would say the same about Paprise on an individual level. And as a team, they look like a new team. When you watch them play, they lack the initiative. If we had a statistic which told us how much time they spent in their opponent's half of the map, it would be extremely minimal, would be my bet. I think it would probably be the lowest in the league. So and a stat like that can be pretty telling. Even while a team looks like they're doing okay, If they're not getting into their opponent's half of the map, it's telling that they're going to struggle to close games. Even in situations where they might have gold leads against more experienced rosters, I just don't see them being able to close games. So I predict a pretty low finish between 6th and 8th for them as well.
Callum, anything to add or counter there?
I think Bencel summed it up pretty well, except I'd just like to add that Tectonic like to play a fairly slow, reserved-paced games, and that isn't exactly something that particularly works in the OPL. You look at teams like AV, you look at teams like Direwolves, and they will basically run you over in the first 15 minutes. Although, on that note, Tectonic were able to pick up a win against AV, although that's more due to AV's mid-game fumbles, which they consistently do week in, week out. But the thing is, Tectonic isn't suited to like the OPL style at this current point in time, and that's purely due to the fact that, in my opinion, they do have the weaker laners. And if you have the weaker laners, then you're going to be abused earlier on. So if they were... And I said this, might have been week 2, when they versed Legacy, they picked the outscaling composition against Legacy, and that's their matchup that's like suited to them. That's due to the slow playstyle Legacy play, but Legacy aren't every team in the OPL.
Right. So the one thing I sort of wanted to chip in on there with is that Paprise has been okay. I would say that you mentioned Bencel, you mentioned him and Swathe together. I would have said that Swathe was the more impressive of the two, simply because I kind of get a bit of deja vu watching Paprise play to last split. If I was, and I believe I made this point to Callum when we were watching last week's games on Discord together, that if I was to tell you about a top laner who came into the match against the Chiefs, coached by through the Tectonic org, so coached by Cyclone, that stomped Swiper in lane and then brought a ultimately irrelevant lead to a team fight that he couldn't translate. Am I talking about Praedyth last year or Paprise earlier in the year? Because it was a very mirrored performance, and that's the one thing that really worries me about Tectonic moving forward, is that Paprise was the next hype top laner, arguably the next sort of Pabu, I guess, and I just really don't want to see him stagnate like I thought Praedyth did in the TM org last year, which thankfully he's doing quite well for himself now. But yeah, that was my concern. Do you guys think that is that a concern for the Tectonic org's player stagnation, or am I reading a bit too much into one match against the Chiefs?
I can piggyback a little bit off your point regarding Paprise. I think one of his problems is that, and it's more of a team problem than a personal problem for him, is that he seems to be a fairly lane-centric player. And like I mentioned this earlier, that they seem like a new team. And to contextualize that a little bit, I think what I mean is that they look like a new team in that they play to scale. And one thing to remember about solo queue is that teams are not good at closing the game if you're playing in solo queue. So a very common strategy in solo queue when you're behind is just say, okay, let's just scale, let's not make any plays, and they will fumble at 50 minutes and then we can win. And that obviously does not translate into competitive play, because teams understand how to play macro and they're talking to each other. For Paprise, he seems like a lane dominant player, and when he tries to play in a lane dominant fashion to get an early lead, it doesn't work because his team doesn't create other pressure points around the map. His bot lane never pressures in lane as far as I can tell. Shock is always just happy to farm. He does it well against good opponents, but he'll never be a pressure point. So Paprise is kind of just like a lone figure, where like even if he's playing a champion like Ornn, he might have lane pressure against Gnar, which we've seen many times in the OPL be not a good matchup for Gnar. And in trying to be aggressive, he will get punished, he might fall behind, he might become irrelevant, or at times when he gets a lead, he doesn't understand how to translate that into team fights, so he hugs the side lane too much, or he doesn't swap from Ignite to TP early enough to take advantage of his lead. Yeah, so I would just add that on.
Sure. Okay, so
I just want to go in off the back of that. So what you also have to consider is obviously Papyrus is the new player, but it's also a new team, and they're still getting used to the concept of trading sides of the map. And obviously, you've got Low and Tilting in the bot lane who are rarely ever pressuring. So it's like, okay, top lane's a strong lane, right? But the thing is, Swaith can't be there 24/7. So you have Papyrus who's like, I need to push my lead, but they're not trading sides of the map correctly, so Papyrus gets punished for it.
Right, so if we, if that's the setup that they're in, then that sort of neatly translates into also where do they go from here? How are they going to bring this lane dominant top laner into the rest of the map to sort of maybe pick them up some wins? Is that just a like a team focused on the top, on playing around top, or do we have some ideas as to how they can do that? How do we see Tectonic going?
Okay, so for me, if we just compare them to the Bombers, they have shown far more promise. And the reason for me saying that is that in recent weeks, when they have had forms of engage on their compositions, which I think they were probably lacking earlier in the split, but I think they tunneled a little bit too hard on scaling. With more forms of engage, they have actually been trying to take fights and make macro plays, which is good to see compared to, like I said, the Bombers. And that is really something that they can build on, the fact that if that is like a continuous trend for them for the rest of the split, that could leave them in good stead for split 2. And I don't necessarily think they should make any roster changes unless they're really glaringly obvious at the end of the split. And I think the biggest change that needs to happen with the team through communication is the way that Swaith plays. At the moment, you said like he's doing pretty well. And I would agree with that. But he is not, going back to what Callum said, he is not trading sides of the map. He's not understanding that when his top laner is creating pressure, that he can perhaps do the same thing bot lane. A lot of the times, you'll see something will go wrong for them on the map, like the enemy team will make a TP play bot. He won't necessarily know how to counter that. But that is definitely something that I believe that they have the capability to fix, and I think Cyclone will identify that. And I would really love to see that as we go further on into the split.
Okay, and Callum, anything to add on to that?
What I will add on to that, I've actually quite enjoyed seeing how Tectonic have they've been drafting a little bit to opponent, and that's actually been giving them the best chances of winning, so I expect them to like continue with that. But the only problem I'm seeing is that they don't really have like a set game plan. So they're not really setting up like an early game, which is where they're going to need to be able to create some form of advantage, because obviously, for the most part, they do have the inferior laners. So they need to work out a way in which they are able to create a minute advantage to actually be able to transition into the mid game. Because as Bencel said, they will actually engage, unlike the Bombers. And we saw that against AV, where they got to a point and they're like, okay, we can actually win this game, and they fought again. Obviously, AV did make the mistakes to allow them to get to that point, but once they get to their point, they actually don't look too terrible.
I think consistent team fighting is one of the first things that a team can hang their hat on, is say they're starting to work together well. So you make a strong point that that's something that Tectonic have been doing and the Bombers have not, so it's a good point of comparison between the two. But what I think we'll do now is we'll move to the next team, and we'll sort of maybe try and get through it a bit quicker. That's probably my fault for always throwing my own 2 cents in there, really. Next team on the list is the first team with a match win is Sin. So aside from the obvious, they changed all of their players. How have they gotten to where they are now?
So I'll take the lead on this one, and
onto you, Callum, my bad.
So Sin started the split with basically removing their entire roster except Tubes, and what that left them with is what everyone can effectively say was four outright weaker players. You had like a mini Dokla of sorts in Praedyth, where Juice can spend his time top lane, and Praedyth will be able to get the advantages, because obviously He's known as that split push player, as was Dokla. Bedoink, while he has the good Cassiopeia, is honestly not even close to Ryoma. Dream's little bit of budget FBI, and Kuden's the complete 180 on Rogue. So going into the split, Sin had a lot of issues to work out in being able to, one, get their roster OPL ready for week 1, and 2, to be able to get them in to be able to win a match. So going into the first couple of weeks, Sin obviously had the same issues that most teams did in the lack of engage, lack of really trying to win a game, and
They
obviously
had the problem that most OPL teams had in not having their starting roster. But that's
that is very true. As obviously Kuden was banned and K-pop was playing, I believe.
yeah, it was K-pop. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
But I think the biggest problem, and I think there are a few teams that have this problem, is they are yet to truly kind of define a playstyle. So what I mean by that is they're trying a lot of things. They're giving their players room to play comfort. Obviously, we've seen Bedoink on his Yasuo against Direwolves. But what that means is that their overall development is halted because they're not learning how to actually play together as a team on a macro sense. So their macro development is actually halted due to the fact that they're learning so many styles and they're not actually going to absorb a lot of that because they're playing so much.
Bencel?
Yeah. Okay. So
This is a team obviously close to your heart, so you might have a bit better insight than all the rest of us do.
yeah, I mean, well, Juves is close to my heart. The rest of it a little bit further from my heart. But I would say that, I mean, I have worked with Praedith a little bit. He did try out for Sin quite a long time ago before he picked up players. And he's definitely a player that I saw a lot of potential in terms of being someone who he could play both styles. He can play carries, he can play tanks. I think that there are too many solo kills in his lane, both ways. I think that is kind of symptomatic of it's symptomatic of playing too aggressively and players not basing enough, I think, is another thing. I find that happens a lot in his matchups in particular. I have liked them a lot better when they play meta champs, to be honest. When they play things that are out of meta, they look so much worse, and it makes the game so much harder to execute on whatever your plan is, no matter what lane Yasuo is in. Bedoink has looked good recently, and so has Juves. I think those two have looked really good recently. In their last match, in particular, but Bedoink has been on the climb since the start of the split, I would say, which is good signs. Good signs.
Definitely.
The bot lane. It reminds me a lot of the Tectonic bot lane. They seem to just be settling in. Playing very passively, not really looking for any kind of pressure. Juves doesn't tend to play around their lane much. What it looks like is that they, again, I would say that the reason they go to these non-meta picks is because they're not practiced enough, is what it tells me. If you practice the meta picks more, they will be stronger. If you haven't got enough practice on the meta picks, then you're more likely to lean on champs when the timer is ticking down on what champion to pick. You're likely to lean on something that is more comfortable for you in that moment of weakness. So I think overall their bot lane looking similar to Tectonic. Bedoink has shown to be proactive. He looks good when he goes to the side lane. I'd like to see a little bit less aggression from Praedith. He doesn't need it when Juves and Bedoink are playing so well together. But you know, on those games where he is put on a carry, he needs to be more responsible. He can't allow these situations to continually come up where he's playing a counter pick like Lucian into Gangplank, and which is putting a lot of pressure on yourself to execute. If you're willing to go into that matchup, you need to absolutely crush Gangplank, because he's going to be so much more relevant than you the later the game goes. You have to take like tier 2 towers at 12 minutes into the game.
As I'm saying, the earlier the less you crush him, the earlier you get overtaken into Gangplank as well, of course.
Absolutely.
That makes it
Yeah.
more important.
Definitely.
Yeah. Once he's got Sheen, Jorum's Fish, Ninja Tabi, but
Oh,
then you just haven't got enough of a lead, then he starts to turn the tables on you, and you never get that table back. And yeah,
You just read those 3 items out, and I just winced in agony.
yeah, like I think Spawn mentions it pretty much every week, and he's on the money. Absolutely, it is really hard to play against Gangplank, but especially for teams that they don't know how to play tanks well enough. Like it is a common thing for teams that don't have enough cohesion yet, that when they try and play a tank top laner, they won't know what to do. They'll play their lane. They won't know how to play the map. And if you don't know how to play the map against Gangplank and you're a tank, then you may as well not be in the game, because you're just going to sit under your tower, getting out farmed, getting out scaled, and you're not going to give your team a lead at all. So naturally, people go to these really risky carries, and well, we've seen what happens time and time again. Sleeping showed it against Chippies, who's probably the best Gangplank, although Tally would probably contest that. But yeah.
Okay. So I just want to ask one question to the both of you, just to sort of parlay where have they come from into where they're going. And the one thing I noticed when I look through the pick and bans for this split is that one thing, Sin pick a lot of Ezreal for Dream, and the other thing is that nearly a quarter, well, basically a quarter of all bans directed at Sin have been at AD carries, with a lot of Varus bans. Is this something? Is this the? Do you think they're targeting Dream to sort of put him on a champion? Like he had a couple of good games against the Bombers, but everyone looked pretty good in games 2 and 3 against the Bombers, I would say. And other than that, Ezreal's been pretty underwhelming. Do you think this is a plan that teams have put in? Because Sin are clearly keen to pick Ezreal for Dream, and it's not really been great. Is this? Do you think this is a targeted plan that teams are directing at Sin?
Go for it, Callum.
To some extent, I definitely think, because I can't exactly recall all the lane matchups, but there are definitely times where I could say Dream and Kuden should be able to win bot lane if they're proactive. So they've locked in the Ezreal, for I don't know exactly what it is, but say they've locked in Ezreal Braum, which is quite a strong 2v2 lane, where there's a little bit of kill pressure. And the thing is, if you're playing Ezreal, you need to be able to push those early levels, and if you're not able to push those early levels, then you're going to fall behind. The thing with the Sin bot lane is you've got Dream, Kuden obviously being known as the passive, more very reserved player, nothing like what Rogue was when he was playing for Sin. And what's that's basically doing is what that does is it delays Ezreal's basic power spike. Because if you're not playing aggressively on Ezreal, you're not going to be going for those Qs. You're going to be using those Qs to farm under tower. And if you don't get the Klepto procs, you don't get your Manamune, you don't get your Triforce, Iceborne Gauntlet at the timings you want them, which basically puts you behind. So obviously you brought up that Varus was banned, and I think that by far Dream has looked the most comfortable on Varus. His positioning is actually quite solid. To compare him to, say, Tiger in his early weeks, with his positioning is very safe, especially considering what he was going against, especially in the game against Direwolves, where, let's be real, he should not have been able to teamfight the way he was with the given champions. But the thing, end of the day, teams are going to let them have Ezreal because they're not going to play aggressive enough to abuse the pick.
Yeah, I'll just mention for Ezreal that I think the reason that he came back into the meta was obviously because of Kleptomancy, and if you're not making use of that, then he doesn't belong in the meta. So they're kind of falling into a trap where I think the idea is just, okay, we're going to play around our other 2 lanes, we'll pick something safe for you guys where you can just sustain and farm no matter what you're against. Like, so they play Ezreal Taric, and you're guaranteed to be able to farm. You'll probably lose your tower, but you'll be able to farm against any matchup with that, and you don't need pressure from your jungler to do anything. But yeah, I mean, he hasn't particularly showed up in team fights either, and Kuden's never had a chance to do anything because of these matchups they're given, which I think is not an unreasonable game plan. it would just be nice to see something different from them, if it exists.
Okay, so with all that said, how are we seeing them? They're currently obviously sixth of the top ranking team chasing the last gauntlet spot. And Jews talked to the OPL team in an interview that went up on their website at some point during the week. I think it was today or yesterday, but I'm not 100% sure. And said that they're taking the why not us approach, so to speak, to getting fifth. Do we see them getting there, or do they not quite have the horses yet?
At the current point in time, at least from what we're seeing from the other teams in the top 5, probably not going to make it this split. Maybe they make it next split, but this split probably not. I think that particularly the bot lane needs to develop, especially if, say, we get into a heavy carry jungle meta where we go to like Lee Sin, Elise, and carries are still in the top lane, and that's mainly due to the fact that I've never known Kuden to be a primary engage. And if you're not going to be having the primary engage from support, maybe that forces an off Juves or Praetor to play something that isn't exactly meta. And that's basically concerns of how they're going to improve if the meta changes, because I don't see them being too meta resistant at the moment. I think with Juves on, say, the Jarv and the Zax, that's going to be their best chances, as well as Praetor on the carries. So my real worries have come to the meta.
Okay, Bencel?
Well, I mean, there's always the possibility of like Elise and Rek'Sai coming back, and I don't see how that would hurt Juves. Those have always been really good picks for him. He knows how to execute on the early game on those champions, almost as well as the best junglers in the league.
My point was more towards having Juves as more of a primary engage threat as opposed to being like secondary engage or maybe just like pick threat.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. But I was just saying, I was kind of saying that if those champions come back into the reason that those champions would come back is because team fighting would be taking a backseat to the lane phase and early snowballing. And if that were the case, then maybe they could, put Bedoink on an assassin or put Praetor on a hard carry and try and snowball through lane phase, with Juves just AFK in the brush for them, which is something that he does really well. Look, they could finish 5th. I think it hurts them a lot that they don't get to play Legacy again. The fact that they have to play Direwolves twice, is that right? No, they have to play Direwolves one more time. They get to play Tectonic and Promise. They have to play Order once and Chiefs and AV. Okay, yeah, not being able to play Legacy again, I think, is really what hurts them. They would probably need the win over Legacy. They have a chance of getting 5th, but I think realistically they can't really hope for more than going 3-3. If they go 4-2, like if they get a win over AV, for example, which is possible, then they have a chance. But it partially is also relying a little bit on Legacy losing some games, which could happen.
Sure. Okay, so speaking of Legacy, nice segue, guys. We're going to move right into them. They've the perennial second places, except for obviously last split last year, have also done a 4-person roster change, just like Sin have, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 4 people, and have brought in an import of their own, much like Bombers have. So, go right back to you, Bencel. How have you seen Legacy so far, and how they've gotten to hanging on to this fifth place gauntlet spot?
Well, so the advantage that Legacy had over, if you just directly compare them to Sin, is that they brought in 3 players with a little bit more tenure. I think Sibol was not the best replacement for Carbon, but maybe the best they could have got. Not that he's performed particularly well so far, but he's always been a very up and down player. Claire was a big support player last year, and now he's doing very well in the mid lane. That's good to see. But he's really taking advantage of the champions that are in the meta right now, and I think that's a really big thing for Claire when the meta suits him really well. it's really given him a chance to shine and be the prime carry for that team. We haven't seen much from Mimic yet, but I think his team play is definitely not there yet. I actually don't know how much prior experience he has on teams, but on an individual level, he looks pretty good. And their bot lane, I think they started strong. That's probably a symptom of them playing together for quite a while now. Like, based on what I know, I think Raid and Decoy have been playing quite a lot together, and they wanted to be on a team together. But as the split has gone on, it's shown that they will be outshined by the higher tier bot lanes. I think even I would probably rate Blinky and Jakey over them at the moment. And as a team, they kind of look like the Claire show. Either he is carrying fights for them, and when he's not carrying fights for them, or if he's picked off, then they just fall apart all over the map. So, yeah, that's how I categorize them at the moment.
I'm just going to make 2 quick points before I throw to Callum. Firstly, I just want to take this opportunity to eat some humble pie, so eat some crow. On Claire, I don't think there was anybody more critical of him last year than me. And he has played really, really well this year, and has totally kicked to the curb any doubts that I had about his play. So I just want to take the mea culpa on that one. He has proven me wrong so far this year. He's played really well. Second thing I wanted to just in form of a question. You talked about Raid and Decoy starting strong, and I just went back and had a look at the schedule, and they started with Sin and Tectonic. Is that just a case of playing weaker opposition, do you think? Because then they went on to play Avan, who you talked about, that you think their bot lane is better, and then the Chiefs. So they've had that's pretty much as far away you can get from the first 2 opponents. Do you think that their early start just maybe was quality of competition?
It probably it would have played a part in how well they did in the early game, definitely in the lane phase. But my point would still be that I think Raid's positioning against teams of higher quality who know how to take advantage of a poorly positioned AD carry shows a lot more against high quality opposition.
Sure.
So yeah, that's how I compared them to the other bot lanes.
Alright, so now over to you, Callum. So have you got any observations on Legacy's start to the year and where they've come from to get to here?
So, first of all, I'd like to point out that Legacy historically are known for the slower tempo game. Obviously, Soul Strikes watches a lot of Korean, of the LCK, watches it in the Korean. He brings that to Legacy. He brings the slower Korean pace to Legacy. And I would like to say that Sybil's actually a decent pickup into that style, because Sybil's known as a player who, or at least historically is known as a player who plays around his lanes well, in the sense that he keeps them very safe. He was never, unless he's on Song, he was never really one to necessarily gank and get big advantages, but he was always going to be able to keep his players safe. So the Sybil pickup in that sense was quite good, although he hasn't been performing. And on Bencel's note about Mimic as well, Mimic in the team play sense has had horrific teleports. He's really just gelling into the team. I think in terms of his competitive history, I think he was a KT roster sub and he played for Millennium in 2016, I want to say.
On a really bad UCS team as well. I don't remember.
2017, yeah.
Yeah, 2017.
Oh, it was 2017.
Not a strong EUCS team either.
And basically what I see of Legacy is, obviously, Claire's showing up really well, but the problem is, how do these other 4 members gel into the team? Because at the moment, they're not really gelling together. Obviously, you got Raid Decoy, they're working well together. Claire's popping off, Sybil's a little bit all over the place, and Mimic still hasn't gelled into the team. So my question for Legacy is, when are they going to be able to gel? Because if they gel, then maybe they're able to break into the top 3, but until then, they're going to be locked in 5th.
Okay. So that kind of, I guess, is where do they come from and where do they go all at once. So that's very efficient there. Did you have anything to add on where Legacy are going, Bencel? Like how you see them shaping up? They're only a point behind Avant and 2 points behind Chiefs, but it feels like there's eons between them. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely feels like that. I think there is a very clear distinction between the top 4 and the other teams in the OPL at the moment. I think I'll probably just tack on that. I think Decoy has really he looks very similar to Kuden. He seems to do very little proactive, and I would say the same thing about Raid. Raid looks like he wants to play carry champs, like he pulls out the vein, but I don't really know if that's warranted. I'll actually mention on the Soul Strikes point how he watches a lot of Korean League of Legends. I think I would say that's true of most coaches. I mean, certainly talking about myself, that's almost all I watched when I was the coach of Sin, and they were not known for a slow play style. So I think there is definitely some questions that need to be asked regarding, how much is he actually applying from the way the Koreans play, and how applicable is that to his own team? Because that is definitely something I considered, but I won't go into coaching styles necessarily. I just think that just because he watches Korean League of Legends doesn't mean his team needs to play in a slow way, and that may be something that they need to look at in regards to his style.
I'll just back off that point. Like, if people look at the OPL, a lot of the time we're not being compared to the LCK, we're being compared to LPL. That's the most direct comparison that most people make. So it isn't the LCK, it's the LPL.
Yeah.
I would just like to remind everyone that the hashtag is like no other, so we are actually not like any league.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree that's true.
It's many degrees.
It has to be. Yeah, I don't even know if it's valid to really compare it to the LPL. It's just on such a different level. If you look, if you're trying to just translate plays that those players are capable of executing, it's on a totally different level. So, yeah, I don't know how much you can necessarily take from just comparing cross-league like that. In terms of where they're going to finish, I would say they are a 70% favorite over Sin to finish 5th. I don't really see them placing higher than that. And I don't see why they would advance through the gauntlet at all in their current state, and I don't see them being anything more than the Claire show for the rest of the season. Hopefully we get to see some more promising stuff from Mimic's team play. That would really be the most obvious place that they could upgrade in the short term.
So I'm going to say that the one way that they advance through the gauntlet is through Avant's ability to finish gauntlet matches 2-3. And speaking of Avant, they're the next team on the ladder. They're, as I said earlier, a point above Legacy and a point behind the Chiefs. And the first of the teams in the 3-1 match win record. So I'm someone who hyped up Avant a lot. I said that they looked really, really good in their roster in my roster reaction. There was a bunch of good roster pickups, and I also said that the pickup of Pabo replacing Series would be the most impactful off-season move. And I'm just gonna shout myself out. I think it's been pretty close to right so far. But enough about me. We'll go with Callum first. What do you, the former Avant analyst? How have you seen your old charges, such as how many of the two of them that are left?
To be fair, I have worked with Pabu and Only sporadically in the past as well, so 4 of my boys, I guess. But AV have come out not how I expected. If we've looked at AV last year, Charlie, coach of AV, was always like, we want to pick scaling, we want to play for late game, we want to play heavily around the objectives. But I think a different AV's come out this year, and what we're seeing from AV is, I want to say, quite a very solid 15 minutes of the game, where they're able to get advantages against seemingly every team. But the problem for AV at the moment is what they're doing after 15 minutes, because we've seen many times this split where it's, okay, we have 3k gold lead, and then, oh, it's gone in the next 3 minutes. So, what I want to see from AV is clean up the mid game. And another point I probably should have got on was AV have integrated Pabu, Only, and Frey very well together. Those three work very well together as a unit, as well as Blinky and Jake work well as a unit. But the problem is, they aren't trading sides of the map quite as effectively as what they should. This is leading to some of their mid-game falters. But notably, I want to say that what they do is they will put Frey on a champion with crowd control. He will sack a wave, he will go to top lane, and they will dive top or gank top. They have done this numerous times. They've done it with Galio, they've done it with Malzahar, they've done it with Ryze. Eventually, teams are going to catch on to that. When they do, I want to see adaptation from them, and that's going to be my question mark for this split. Will they adapt from that playstyle?
And Bencel, have you seeing something similar, a bit different from this Avant lineup?
Firstly, I just want to mention a little bit of a cheat there, Reece. I think the biggest roster swap since last year was Chenny Boy for FBI. I think that's probably the biggest.
Touche.
Arguably different teams, but nonetheless.
No, I'll pay that.
But alright. Going on to the points regarding AV, I think really good point. The fact that they go top lane, they pick CC mid laners, and they are helping out Pabu a lot. They clearly see him as their early game pressure point, and they want to accentuate that. I think Frey has been his main role at the moment has been to neutralize mid as much as possible, and his team fighting has been fine, nothing special. But what they've done is they've actually taken a lot of pressure off their bot lane when they do this, which is pretty helpful, I think, for Blinky, because I think typically for that bot lane, they have shown some weakness when the map collapses around them. And I don't think they're a team that has been traditionally quick to react to aggressive plays on one of their lanes. So when teams would rush at their bot lane, they would kind of falter. And that's why they would do well with a pick like Tahm Kench previously. But now that the pressure's been taken off them and they're just playing Nami and Kog'Maw, once they shift their opponent's eyes to the top of the map, it's serving them very well, and I think this is helping Blinky a lot, because when he gets through the early game unscathed, I think a lot of it is a mental thing for him. That's what it seems like. Once he has the confidence to go into the middle game and he knows that he's strong, his team fighting is a lot better. If he struggles in the early game, his team fighting will naturally be worse, whether it's warranted or not. I think they definitely are. I think Callum went into it in great detail. I'll just broadly mention that they are struggling to convert once they get to mid game. I think that Frey has a lack of proactivity after 25 minutes. I would say the same with Only. Maybe they're looking to Pabu as the one to be proactive, and he's not doing it on a regular basis. And their bot lane is not picking playmaking champions. So when it's being left on those players after 25 minutes, they're definitely struggling to do anything around the map. But when the other team runs into them, they handle it very well.
One thing to bring up as well about the proactivity of Only is that Jarvan's actually their most picked champion, and we've seen Juice in particular, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, really just be the go button for Sin on his Jarvan. I guess most notably was that EQ Flash play on Tiger the weekend just gone. But it's a bit of maybe a small, shall we say, alarm bell for Avant, that a champion that can initiate like that is being hard to see on the map post 25 minutes. Callum, you touched briefly on where you saw Avant ending up in terms of their playstyle and what you wanted to see out of them, and I think Bencel, you could touch on a little bit as well. But is there anything else you guys wanted to add on in terms of where they go? Can they catch Chiefs? Do they have third place within them, or are they going to be sort of staying where we see them at the moment in fourth?
Can they catch Chiefs? Yes. But for me, that depends on how much the players improve individually. Because against Chiefs, they'll always lack something. Because Chiefs have obviously just had such a strong roster individually. So obviously we'll look at Pabu, Swiper, bit of a downgrade. Only Bubit, I'll give it to Only. But then Frey, Ryoma, not really comparable. Raze, Blinky, once again, not really comparable. Destiny, Jake. I think Jake has proven himself to be on the edge of getting into the top 3 for supports, if not top 3. But for me, I just think they have to improve individually, because I think AV have always been a team where they're a great team, but they're not necessarily great individually. But if this team becomes great individually, then they will be a really great team.
Yeah, like, I think, to take a slightly different angle on it, I definitely think AV have the ability to make third place here, over Chiefs. It also depends on how order finish off. A lot more people have a lot more confidence in them than I do, but you know, I would still predict them to finish at least second at the moment. But for AV to get it over Chiefs, I think a lot of this is going to fall on Charlie, but I actually have faith in him. I think they've shown a lot of improvement, not only with the roster they had previously, but with also this new roster. They've shown to come up with coherent plans. They understand how to play around objectives. They understand wave control, not necessarily to the degree of Direwolves, for example, but they don't need to compete with Direwolves right now. They need to compete with Chiefs, and I think that they can definitely play on at least their level. And if on an individual level they do start to play a little bit better and they start to understand how to play the game post 25 minutes, that they can be real contenders for third place.
And we'll actually see the second of 2 previews of that match as they play the Chiefs this Saturday. And speaking of the Chiefs, that also allows us to move into them because they're next on the ladder. So the Chiefs turned over 3 roster spots, sorry, in breaking up what was left of the longest standing core in Oceanic history, certainly, and possibly League history as well, with the departure of 2 of their talismanic members. So, Bencel, we'll come back to you first here on the Chiefs. What have we seen from them so far this split?
Well, it was clear that when they decided to keep Swiper, that he was going to be the one who needed to take up the responsible role on the team. Not necessarily to be the only leader. They brought Destiny. You can definitely do some of that. But they brought in Babip and Ryoma. And that is a huge gamble, because Babip, we haven't seen much of him in the OPL, but what you have to think about is there must be a reason that Legacy weren't keen on playing him much while they were using Carbon. So you have to start from the position that he wasn't as good as Carbon, at least, you know, from ground zero.
At the very least, can't sink as many VBs.
Sure.
Sorry, that was completely irrelevant. Carry on.
He hasn't had as many years experience, surely. Ryoma, I think everyone will consider him a very up and down player. He has really high highs, but he also has really low lows, and he takes them to heart. So when he makes a big mistake, he'll put a lot of pressure on himself to try and make up for it. He takes responsibility for his mistakes, but that can be for better or for worse. So I think Raze is definitely the core carry for this team. and he's going to be the one they should be relying on game in, game out. But it's questionable to how much Swipe is going to be able to carry if Ryoma is being more supportive and vice versa, because they haven't been shown to be that consistent. But I think, where did I place them? Originally I had them at second place coming into the split because I do like the roster despite thinking it's risky. I don't think they're as strong as Order right now, so I will expect them to finish third where they are right now.
And what have you seen out of the new Chiefs, and when are they play, Callum?
So if it's Chiefs for me, I think they're still kind of trying to find their footing in how they want to play the game. Obviously, is a big change for Swiper in particular. He's lost his fellow core members of the old Chiefs roster. And with that, I think, so for me, I think Ryoma and Raze in particular are finding themselves in a position where they want to be the primary carry and they want to do everything themselves a little bit. And particularly, I think it was Game 2 Chiefs against Legacy. I think it was Game 2, where Raze was basically 1v5ing and dying a lot of the time. And that to me is symptomatic of people aren't sure of their exact roles within the team yet. Obviously, Raze had come back after Fantech subbed in the first 2 weeks, so maybe that has a little bit of impact. But for me, I think Chiefs just really have to define how they want to play the game. Because if they define how they want to play the game, they should be a really good team, but until they do that, they're going to struggle. Because obviously we've been seeing Swiper in the carries, he's not really doing too hot on the carries. Seeing Ryoma, he's popped off some games, then other games he's tried to be too aggressive, he's died a lot for it. Same with Raze. So for me, define how they want to play is what I want to see.
The one thing that I've seen out of Ryoma in particular, the split, is that I don't know if I can't recall if this was the same situation when he was on Sin, but he just dies in like tragically bad timing situations and in ways that you just like make you like really scratching your head kind of ways. Like there was a couple of times in I think it was Game 2 of the first series they played against Direwolves that you just what was he even doing there?
Yeah, he dies in the side lane while they're resetting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although,
Yeah,
to be fair, he made them look spectacular, almost taking people almost every single circumstance.
He'll always do that, that's for sure.
So that was the one thing that was concerning for me about Ryoma, is that, and that sort of stands to your point, Callum, that in sense of trying to do too much, is that it kind of just felt like he's like, I just need to make this one play, a bit reminiscent of the play he did make at Rift Rivals with blowing up that Caitlyn. Caitlyn. And he just wanted to like blow up I can just get in and blow up this one person, and then, oh no, I'm on a ward. This has gone very badly. That's kind of what it felt like from sometimes. So having said that, we're just looking now at where at their run home. But as I said before, they've got AV this weekend, and they've got the double fixture in Super Week next week, where they get Tectonic and Sin, which is, gee, Super Week's gone well for them. Maybe right felt they owe Chiefs some good Super Weeks. But how do we see the run home from them? Not just from a schedule perspective, but from a playstyle thing. We talked before about them having to hold off Avant. Does that mean we don't see them catching order? We'll go with you first, Bencel.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about individually what we expected and how they've been. I think coming into the split, I would have thought that Swiper was going to be the glue for the team, but I think Destiny has shown that he is playing that role in the team right now. He's
been unreal.
I mean, he's not only the glue, he's been the spike at the front of the ship as well. He's doing a lot of damage. In terms of breaking up teams, splitting them up. He seems to be very active on the mic whenever we get to see him. So I think he's doing a lot of work for their team. I think Babip has been underwhelming, and I would expect more of him. I think he's been quite disrespectful in some games when playing against weaker opposition. The Nunu games come to mind against Iconic, for example, which are very disappointing to see, especially from a player who came from the same team as Carbon. The Nunu god.
I think he forgot that Nunu got hotfixed for the OPL.
I mean, the way he was walking into their jungle when he had absolutely no right to be, and he was overstaying. It was not good to watch. He made it look good in team fights, but I mean, how hard is that really?
I press W on my AD carry. I'm a good Nunu.
Yeah,
I might press it on mid laner now.
Job's done. Their carries, I think Callum mentioned this already. Be great to see more consistency out of them, a more defined role, as you mentioned. Even if it's just trading roles game to game. Even if it's Ryoma saying to Raze, it's your turn to carry this one, and Raze saying it's your turn this game. That'd be really good to see from them. And you know, when it's Raze's turn to carry, you don't want to see him jumping on top of the enemy AD carry when it's just a bizarre, ridiculous play. There's no reason to do it.
No vision, jumps on ADC. Oh no, there are 5 members.
It's just it's just a play that it makes no sense on almost any level, because it is all it is. The only way you can justify it is just by saying he had no respect for his opponent, because all he's saying is, I am going to 1v1 you here. I don't expect your team to be around. I expect you would just be standing there because you're not as good as me, and I'm going to take advantage of that and kill you. And that's the only way it could make sense going through his head. As for their run home, like you said, it looks pretty good. I don't see any reason why they would finish under third. And they could potentially take second, again, based on how we see Order go in these last 2 weeks, because they have been the most unpredictable team.
I'm just trying to have a quick check here to see which team the Chiefs don't get. Looks like Direwolves is the only one they don't play, so
That's a blessing.
That's as good as it gets. Yeah.
Big smiley faces in the schedule column there for Chiefs fans. Okay, so going down to the second last of our 2 teams, the probably most exciting one on paper coming into the split, and certainly if our traffic stats are anything to go by, is Order. So over to you, Callum, for this one. How have you seen Order shaking out so far? The split, some good and a couple of signs for concern for my part. But how did you see it?
So for me, Order obviously had a massive task at hand. We've seen long-term players for teams. We've seen Tally leave Legacy. We've seen Spook Swiffer leave Chiefs. We've seen Rogue leave Sin. And when you're bringing players that have had such long tenures on teams, they're used to playing relatively consistent playstyles, and their roles in teams are obviously going to be relatively consistent depending on the meta and whatnot. So they obviously had a big task at making these players gel together, and for me, they haven't done it yet. They're still grasping at straws on what playstyle they want to play, who does what role, and until they do that, they're probably still going to stay in second purely due to how good they are as individual players, but they're not going to take it from Direwolves. And for me, I'm looking at Order and how they've played this split in particular, and I think Swiffer's been a glaring weakness for me. I think Swiffer has struggled to play mid lane. He has died solo in matchups he shouldn't be dying in. His team fighting's been lackluster, his roaming's been lackluster, and I think especially even last year when he wasn't on Song, he was still able to play the side lanes pretty well, being able to roam to the side lanes, get advantages for Chiefs that way. That's been lacking, so for me, I think Swiffer needs to improve, but on that note, Rogue has been playing really well, so is FBI in the bot lane. Those two are still playing really well together. Yeah, for me, I think Swift just needs to step up.
Yeah,
agree there?
yeah. So, a few points to make about order. I think I want to talk about the bot lane a little bit here. Bot lane very close to my heart. Worked with them all year last year. Two lovely guys, two great players. But when we look at the bot lanes that we have for this year, as far as I know, only two of the bot lanes have had much experience together, and that is the two that were together all of last year, Blinky and Jake and FBI Rogue. And those are the two bot lanes that have been looking the most consistent so far, and I think that's very telling in terms of all the teams. And those guys have been playing phenomenally well together. I think beyond just being consistent, they have been a constant pressure point for the team, as they were on Sin, always threatening in the lane phase. Can go pear-shaped for them, but it rarely ever does. You almost always back them to come out of lane ahead. Swiffer, on the other hand, he's been a bit of a wild card. Typically a very bad wild card. Spooks, I think, has been very consistent. I actually think Spooks has been probably the next best performing player after their bot lane. I think he does well on tank junglers. A lot of people will say that he is... there's a lot of contention over to what champion suits Spooks better, but I really do think that he is more suited to playing these tanky style junglers. He understands his role really well. He knows how to engage and tank for his carries. Tally's been pretty good. I think he's had a lot of Gangplank games, and that helps him out a lot. I think he's played a bunch of Ornn and even a Maokai game. And I would say on the tanks he hasn't looked as good, which is very typical for him. And it's something that he's been trying to work on for a long time now, trying to even up the way that he plays tanks and carries, and get them on a similar level. But he'll always be more naturally inclined towards the carries. But overall as a team, I think they haven't really solidified an identity yet. At the moment, their identity is let's try and win through bot lane. Swiffer, you run down there. Spooks, you run down there. Tally, you press Gangplank ulti under their tower, and we'll clean up the game from there. Once FBI has 3 to 4 kills, and that's really just been their main win condition. And in games where they're not looking good, in the early game they typically just try and scale for FBI to get items and carry through them that way. So they've been a bit of one note, which is not what you would expect from a team with Tally and Swiffer. But I mean, Tally has had games where he's looked good, but it's kind of hard to say that for Swiffer at this stage.
So the one thing I wanted to bring up is that, and you talked about this about having Order not really knowing, it's a bit of an identity issue, same as what some other teams have had, and also, just around that point generally, Order are actually in the top half, 3rd overall by my count, I think, possibly 4th, but definitely in the top 4 of most champions picked, which that can also be a product of what's banned against you. But it does sort of as well speak to somewhat to an identity thing, is having to, if you're not really sure on what you're good on, you tend to sort of fan out a bit, and that also speaks to what we said about the Bombers, who are leading the OPL with 34 different champions picked, and Order are sitting there at 27. Ooh. The teams that we've been complimenting for their better and more consistent play, teams like Avant and Direwolves, are down in the 20 to 22 range. So that's one point that would sort of, I think, or at least is how I see it, speaks to what you guys are saying.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to sort of throw that out there. How do we see Order closing out the split? We'll go back to Callum for this one. How do you see them closing out the? It was a very competitive series against the Direwolves, and if memory serves, they're only a point behind them. I'm just gonna bring standings back up.
Ooh.
Oh no, they're even on
I think
points.
they're even.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right. They're even on points. Direwolves have the match win percentage though, because they've had 2-2-1s. And all Order's wins have been 2-0. So, well, given that they're even, can they catch them? Cal?
What is the run home? Do they play Direwolves again?
Yes, they will, because Chiefs don't, so everyone else does.
So that basically solidifies it for me that they probably won't overtake Direwolves at all. So for Order, for me, I want to see them solidify what they want to how they want to play. Once they do that, maybe they'll overtake Direwolves. But for me, this was never a pick. This was never a roster that you say split one. We want you to win. For me, it was always come second, maybe third. But use the first split to develop your playstyle and to develop cohesion between all the members, because on paper, this is a team that can definitely contest Direwolves. But I don't think it was never meant to truly contest Direwolves in the first split. So for me, solidify the playstyle, work towards that split 2, and then that's where I really want to see Order pick it up and overtake.
Yeah, so I think, going back to your point regarding their champions, the number of champions, I would want to add the caveat that I do think Order are slightly more justified in picking more champions compared to the lower tier teams, given that they have more skilled players. So, and they haven't really been picking outside of the meta, as far as I know. Every time I watch them pick a team comp, they really are just picking meta champions. So I don't really think that they're reaching too far. I think what that is symptomatic of is not having a coach on stage with them doing their pick ban. I think that does affect what champions they end up going with. They're more likely to pick something. Oh, I'd like to show that I can shine on this champion this time.
Nidalee
It's more likely to seep through the cracks. Nidalee Rengar might be 2 examples of that. Even FPI on Xayah. But otherwise, yeah, I think the fact that they don't play Direwolves means that they do have a chance to catch Direwolves, because I do think they are a team that, if they do get going, they could just straight 2-0 every team that they play from here on out.
They do play Direwolves, by the way.
Oh, they do play Direwolves?
Yeah, week 7. So every team doesn't play one opponent, and it's Chiefs that miss out on Direwolves.
Okay, so who do Order miss out on?
Order, so I'll tick them off.
Tectonic? Yeah, they miss out on Tectonic. I think.
Yeah, it looks like Tectonic.
Yeah, okay. Alright, so they could 2-0 every other team, then that will just be the pivotal match then. Their match against Direwolves. It'll be really exciting to see how that goes. In the lead up to that, what I would like to see is just them sticking with a slightly more refined champion pool. Swiffer playing better. Maybe he's trying to play too many champions when he's in a bit of a rut. I do think that if you are struggling on form, that you should be sticking to playing less champions. It puts less strain on your practice. And to what I know, they are having problems with their practice, getting enough regular practice in. But, you know, if we're seeing diversity from Rogue and FBI, I don't really have a huge problem with that. I think they are capable of it. And look, I predict them to finish second, but they have a chance to finish first.
Okay.
But also a chance to finish third and fourth.
And perhaps maybe if they just to sort of maybe third would sort of suit you there. Maybe.
As the only person who placed them at third place. Now look, I just want to make something clear regarding power rankings, okay? Because this seems to be a little bit of contention. What power rankings means is, if they were to play finals right now, where would this team place? That's what power rankings means. If you think it means anything else, then you're mistaken to what it means. It does not mean where will they be when the split is over. It means if they play right now. So at the start of the split, before this team had played a single game, saying that they will finish first place makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't understand how you can be justified in saying that when they haven't played a match yet. Because you don't know what the way that they're playing looks like in any sense.
Not mentioning any names, Andrew Ray. We don't know. He's not in there.
That is why
Swifty or Egypt.
third place. It is nothing to do with bad blood between me and them or anything like that.
I mean, clearly not. They've got two of your former Chargers on the team.
Absolutely, and I love those guys. And I want them to do well, much like with all my ex-players. But look, by the end of the split, if you told me could they finish first by the end of the split, I would have said absolutely. I have no reason to think that they couldn't. But without having seen a single game from them, I don't understand how you could place them first.
Okay, so
second.
With all that said, and we've gone we've actually gone real
Very over.
But so in my opinion, probably the last team left's probably the least interesting one because it's pretty, at least for my mind, it's pretty clear. But the Dire Wolves, we'll start with the easy stuff. How have they got here? One might say better than everyone else. Bencel, what would you say?
Better than everyone else? Well, I think I was probably one of the most optimistic people about the roster changes they made. I think that Cupcake actually brought something to their team that maybe they didn't have. I think they didn't need the direction from Destiny in-game. I think Schönfire and Chippies handle that pretty well. So, you know, Cupcake brings some of that himself, not to undersell him at all. But coming into a new roster, he wouldn't necessarily be expected to. But I think he brings some lane power to King, which I thought he was lacking. And I think they are doing better in lane because of it. And with Triple, I have been a huge fan of his as a player for Avant last year, where I thought he had entirely too much pressure on him to deal the bulk of their damage.
To their credit, he did.
Yeah, and a lot of people questioned me when I was talking about the champion pool for Fantix and Triple. People said Triple had a very similar champion pool to Fantix. My rebuttal to that is that when he was on AV, he didn't really have much choice. He had to play super high damage champions like Corki almost every game. If he wasn't, then they just did not have enough damage. You could never play utility. Whereas Fantix, I felt, was simply incapable of playing other champions. It takes him so long. He's similar to Swiffer in that way. It takes him so long to learn a new champion. Whereas I don't think Triple suffers from that. I think Triple is a more mechanically gifted player, and he can pick up new champions more quickly. Doesn't have the same experience or knowledge or CSing ability. Of course, those things are all lacking in comparison. But nonetheless, I thought he would be a fine replacement. And thus, I didn't see any reason why they would fall below first place. I have a lot of faith in what Sharp does and what King, Schönfire, and Chippies do as a unit as well.
For you, Callum?
So first and foremost, I want to reiterate Bencel's statement in saying that Triple was by far a suitable replacement for Fantix. Personally, I've said that Triple can be the number one mid laner in OCE. I think for me, Triple is someone who never really practiced enough outside of scrims. He didn't play enough solo queue for me. So the fact that he can come in and play champions as many champions as he's been able to across his career is kind of a testament to how naturally gifted he is at the game. But also on that point, when you looked at Fantix, he was always a mastery mid laner. He'd be very good at the mid lane as he did pick up, but he couldn't play everything. I don't think he ever really played Cassiopeia ever across in his career, and that's kind of saying something that maybe his champion pool wasn't as big as what people like to say his was. But end of the day, for me, Direwolves have basically tried to keep somewhat an identical style. Obviously, they're always going to be playing around Schönfire and his solo Q-esque style of jungling. I thought that when they brought in Prelus, that they played around Prelus really well. Obviously, they put him on the more solo QS kind of picks with the Shyvana and the Evelyn. So obviously, it kind of made the transition for them with Prelus a little bit easier. But I think for me, on the up for Direwolves, they haven't really been playing as aggressive as they had in the past. In the past, they were very aggressive, and that would often tend to lead to mistakes, particularly against lower end teams where they just didn't respect, and they made a lot of mistakes. I think there was a series against Abyss last year, notably, where Abyss won like several team fights, like 15k gold behind, and that's purely due to the aggressive play that they showed. But they definitely showed that they're on the up, and for me, Direwolves are still head and shoulders above the rest of the league.
So the weird thing is, I just wanted to jump in quickly here. You talk about Direwolves' ability to lose team fights 15,000 gold down. That's something that I've seen from them over the years. It's really weird because by now none of the players are the same. Like I remember the infamous Wolf Spirit Smite series when the Direwolves played against Sin, and we're talking 2016 now. That in game 2 of that series, where Sin by all rights should have been tilted off the face of the earth from that incident, but they were 10,000 gold down and won 2 consecutive team fights and nearly stole game 2 out from under the Direwolves' nose. So it's weird that they've had that, and also they did it in 2017. So just time and here and now, they just drop team fights when they shouldn't. And considering that none of the players are the same from that series I'm talking about to now, it's really strange that that's continued. It's an anomaly.
Well, talking about the current iteration, I think that a lot of it will have to come from Chippies. He lives by his sword and he dies by it. He is someone who he wants to play carries. He plays carries nearly every game, and he overestimates himself a lot of the time. And when that happens, he will be playing a carry. He will walk into a team fight as a carry should not, when he should just stay in the side lane. When they have a lot of success when he's just in a side lane, and he'll just join a fight for no clear reason. And they'll initiate it poorly because often their team comps lack tanks and initiation, and they will lose a fight when they're 10 gold ahead because all that gold is meant to be into split pushing, which they do very well, and they stick to it against the top teams, but when they're against the opposition they don't necessarily respect, they will just throw that all out the window and jump into unnecessary team fights.
Okay, so they're on top by basically match win tiebreaker, and looks like most of us see us staying there. It's going to come down to either a stumble in the rematch against Order or a first place. That's how I see it. I'm sort of in the form. Do you see anything different happening?
Go for it, Cal.
Not particularly. I think, for me, Direwolves, if they're to continue to grow, that split, I'd only really comment on Triple's overall performance. Hasn't been the most consistent. Obviously, he had a really good week last week, but before that, he was a little bit lackluster, at least from my perspective and what I know he can do. But besides that, they're just looking like to be really solid. They've stuck to their guns. They're still playing the same kind of style from last year. And the thing is, it's still working. Why do they need to change it?
They'll just blind pick Jax when it's out of meta. Makes no sense. In the top lane, I should say, not in the jungle.
But it worked.
They lost that game, didn't they?
No, they won that game.
Oh, no, that was
They won
that
that
one.
one.
Yeah. That's right. They won. That was game 1. They won.
By all rights, should have lost that game, but they won it nonetheless. He was off the back of Triple and King mainly that game.
Just remembering that team fight we put into the top 5 plays, just King hits literally every Mystic shot, and is somewhat split from the rest of the team as well. It was really superlative team fighting. Anyway, we won't babble on about King. That's for another time and another podcast. And speaking of another podcast, I think that's all we've probably got time for this one. Does anyone have anything they'd like to close with?
I think we covered a lot.
For sure. Alrighty.
I think just as a TLDR, teams in particular on the low end of the spectrum need to define their playstyle. Until they do that, they're gonna find it rough.
Okay, so until next time, you can, well, I guess I should say first, you can catch us on our various socials. You can find all of our articles on @Snowball Esports. You can find Callum @CDMLol. You can find Bencel @Bencel92, and myself @LolTies. So until next time on the Friday Flash Forward, well, we probably won't be Friday next week either, but until then, we will catch you next time.
Thanks.
Cheers.